Hey, you guys. Thank you so much for tuning in. Now that Johnny Depp's attorneys have had a chance to speak out, I want to do a reaction video for Heard's attorney and just kind of compare those two. So let's take a look.
Elaine Charleston, Bredehoft, good morning to you. It's good to see you. First question, how is Amber doing? We saw her hearing that verdict. It took a long time to read. It was a sweeping verdict for Johnny Depp. How did she handle it?
You know, one of the first things she said is, I am so sorry to all those women out there. This is a setback for all women in and outside the courtroom. And she feels it, and she feels the burden of that.
Well, no.
Let me stop you right there, Elaine. That is Amber's L. Amber needs to take her L and stop involving everyone else. I find it interesting how it is Amber kind of she's the main one wanting to make it about her and everyone else. Like, oh, it's about the movement. It's about I'm like she's still trying to be this public figure. No, it was your claims versus your ex-husband. That is a single case. So winning or losing has nothing to do with, Me Too or anything like that. Or she can speak for herself, and she can take that L by herself. I guess maybe I think she's just hiding behind the, setback for women and the Me Too movement is kind of like a shield for her, losing.
Knowing the case and knowing the law, as you certainly do, it favors defendants like Amber Heard. Are you stunned that the jury essentially rejected her story?
Well, really what happened here is it's a tale of two trials. Johnny Depp brought a suit in the UK for the same case, and the burden of proof was easier for him there. The son had to actually prove that it was true, and the court found there, and we weren't allowed to tell the jury this, but the court found that Mr. Depp had committed at least 12 acts of domestic violence, including sexual violence, against Amber. So what did Depp's team learn from this? Demonize Amber and suppress the evidence. We had an enormous amount of evidence that was suppressed in this case that was in the UK case. In the UK case, when it came in, Amber won, Mr. Depp lost.
But
So I find that statement interesting, like suppressing the evidence. So I don't know if you guys have been following Legal Tube or Law Tube here on YouTube. I have, and it's been fascinating to get like the legal perspective of things. And several of the attorneys have looked at the UK trial and they found that a lot of hearsay evidence was admitted. So, and a lot of Johnny's evidence was not admitted, and he was deemed not to be credible due to the fact that he was a drug and alcohol abuser. So I find it interesting. Like a pattern that we're going to see is that Amber Heard is like the queen of projection. So whatever she says Johnny's doing, she's done. So suppressing the evidence demonized the victim. His evidence wasn't let in the UK, and they demonized him. So, like addiction is very, very stigmatized. I can speak to that. Working in the mental health field, it is more stigmatized even than HIV. And so they really use that to their advantage in this trial, constantly saying, well, he doesn't remember anything. He's a junkie, or he does drugs, or I took that I think Amber said on one of the days of testimony, somebody in the comments, you can put it, what day it was, but she says, oh, I take what he says with a grain of addict salt. So, you don't want to be victim blame, or you don't want your flaws held against you, but you're turning around and doing the same thing. So I think their strategy was to demonize the victim and trying to, suppress his evidence, which reminds me, I think Eve Barlow, if you guys don't know her, she's one of Amber's best friends, or I don't know. She's always tweeting and blocking people, but she got kicked out the courtroom because she passed. No. Well, I know she passed a message or Instagram pic to get one of their witnesses excluded. I don't know all the details, so don't quote me on it. But I think the reason she got kicked out was that she was live tweeting in the trial. But she was also like it was a little misleading to get one of Johnny's witnesses kicked off of the case. So, like I said, it's just a case of the tale of two trials, a case of projection, really.
That's the thing. You were able to get some evidence that you say demonstrated abuse. You certainly had her testimony. There were pictures, documents, all kinds of evidence. But in point of fact, the jury rejected it. You argued in your closing arguments that if they found even one instance of abuse, and it did not even have to be physical abuse, that they would have to find for Amber Heard, and they didn't.
And the other part to bear in mind here is nothing changed. The op-ed didn't even mention Mr. Depp by name. And so what basically they did here is demonize her. And they were able to suppress the medical records, which were very, very significant because they showed a pattern going all the way back to 2012 of Amber reporting this to her therapist, for example. We had significant amount of texts, including from Mr. Depp's assistants, saying, when I told him he kicked you, he cried. He is so sorry. That didn't come in.
All right, I'm going to go ahead and speak to this about the therapist's notes and the records. So I don't know the legalities of what or why that was excluded. Again, go to a law tube because they know more about like what is admissible versus inadmissible evidence. And I know like they try to admit evidence that's as objective as possible and it's not hearsay, and there's some hearsay exceptions. I'm not the expert on that, but I can speak to the therapist's notes. So they wanted those to come in, that Amber Heard had been reporting, violence or whatever it is from Johnny to this therapist. I will speak as a therapist, a treating therapist, that what you tell us, we just document what you say. A therapist's note just saying, oh, the client reported so-and-so doesn't mean that it happened. It just means that's what you told us. And we operate off of the assumption that you are telling us the truth, or we're treating you based on your complaints and what your symptoms are. So it doesn't really, necessarily do you any good if you are being deceptive, but some people are deceptive. I also work in a hospital setting. So from the hospital and private practice, you can kind of get the gist of when people are being inconsistent and when there's some deception there, whatever their motivations are, who knows? Some people know that a medical record or a therapist note is considered like something they can use for legal purposes. And so that's why they're reporting like, oh, I want this documented. I mean, that's not uncommon at all. I've had, a lot of people say, oh, make sure you put this in the note. Make sure you put that in the note. So it's not unreasonable to assume that she started reporting that because maybe she wanted some documentation for whatever reason, whether it happened or whether she had concocted some type of plan, whatever, who knows. But just saying that, oh, the therapist's record proves that it happened. No, it doesn't. It just proves that she told the therapist whatever it was that she told them.
Is there any other way to interpret this verdict, though, that this jury, for whatever reason, and I hear you on some of the evidence that they didn't hear, listening to Amber Heard, did not believe a single word?
And that's because she was demonized here. A number of things were allowed in this court that should not have been allowed. And it caused the jury to be confused. We weren't allowed to tell them about the UK judgment. So the damages is completely skewed. There are no damages. It stopped at November 2, 2020, which is when the judgment came down in the UK.
Let me ask.
Okay, I feel she's being a little dishonest, or not dishonest. I want to say just like insincere, disingenuous, and saying that a lot of things that came in shouldn't have been allowed to come in. Ma'am, we all watched the trial. You couldn't keep your stuff together. The judge had to get you all the way right. The judge had to tell you what, if anything, doesn't fix the question. You're leading Elaine. You're, calling for speculation. Your team was scattered and all over the place, just like your client. So to kind of, the end of the trial say, oh, thank you, judge, for this opportunity. And then to go on the press junket and say, oh, some things were allowed in that shouldn't have been. And it's just showing, again, the lack of accountability. Just say, we fought a hard fight. We believe in our client. We plan to appeal. But just to kind of blame the court, blaming the judge, blaming the jury, and I think the interviewer was doing a great job of trying to hold Elaine to the fire. Like, hey, what about Amber? What made her not believable? Because the truth is they didn't have to demonize Amber. They didn't get on the stand and said, oh, you used to be a stripper and you did this and you did that. All they did was just impeach her with her own words, her own testimony, her prior depositions. They just showed things that didn't line up to what she was saying. So she demonized herself, if that's what you're considering to be demonized. I don't think they didn't make her out to be a liar. Her own words made her out to be a liar.
Ask you about social media in this case. Unlike any celebrity case, certainly I've ever covered or ever seen, social media was a part of this. And it was incredibly lopsided and vitriolic against Amber Heard. Do you think that had an effect on the case?
Absolutely.
You think jurors were aware of it? They weren't supposed to be. They're admonished every single day. don't look at it. Do you think they did see it?
How can you not? They went home every night. They have families. The families are on social media. We had a 10-day break in the middle because of the judicial conference. There's no way they couldn't have been influenced by it. And it was horrible. It really, really was lopsided. And I appreciate your saying that. It's like the Roman Colosseum, you know, how they viewed this whole case. I was against cameras in the courtroom, and I went on record with that and had argued against it because of the sensitive nature of this. But it made it a zoo.
I don't believe it was the social media that played a part and that the jury was, exposed excessively to that. I think when your own team brings in an expert that says hashtag justice for Johnny Depp has this many tweets and Amber Heard is an abuser and we just don't like you, Amber, and hashtag Amber Turd. Your Amber side brought that in. You brought public opinion into the trial with your counterclaim. So how dare you sit there and say, "Oh yeah, how could the jury the jury just violated their oath and they have all kinds of misconduct." But to me, it's like the person, when you point a finger at somebody, three are pointed back at you, like my teachers used to say. So whatever Amber and Amber Heard's team is saying other people are doing, again, they are doing it. They had some things that were kind of shifty and shady on their side, especially with the Eve Barlow thing that I mentioned earlier. So I just find that very funny that she's kind of defaming the jury. I want to hear the jurors' thoughts if they decide to step forward, like how they feel about Elaine insinuating that they can't think for themselves.
Client want to appeal?
Oh, absolutely. And she has some excellent grounds for it. We even had tried to get the UK judgment in to dismiss his case because he already had his shot. And that's one of the issues, but also a number of the evidentiary issues. There was so much evidence that did not come in.
Is she able to?
Correction, Elaine, he did not have his shot. He did not sue Amber in the UK trial. He wasn't going after her at all. That was a newspaper where he said, "No, you can't call me wife beater. That's not true." And then, the UK has their own system and they basically sided with the newspaper right to be able to call him that. And they just deposed Amber to kind of, I guess, get her testimony, and they allowed that hearsay evidence in, and they discounted Johnny based on him being an addict. So he was demonized. So it's completely, the UK trial and the US trial is completely different. And you can't bring the UK trial in to dismiss this one because it wasn't the same parties involved. At least that's my understanding. That's my novice, legal understanding.
Pay a $10.4 million judgment?
Oh, no, absolutely not.
Finally, in closing arguments, Amber's team argued that this would send a message, that it would send a message that no matter what you do as an abuse victim, you always have to do more. You need to be perfect in order for people to believe you if she did not get a favorable verdict. What message do you think this sends?
It's a horrible message. It's, as I said, a setback. It's a significant setback because that's exactly what it means. Unless you pull out your phone and you video your spouse or your significant other beating you, effectively, you won't be believed.
Elaine Charlson, Bredehoft, thank you very much for your time this morning.
I disagree with that statement. I'm actually going to make a video about this later on why men victims are not believed, because after working, several years in the hospital, working with domestic violence victims, people favor the women when it comes to abuse claims. So we are trained to even look for it, even if it's not there. So, if there's some type of bruising or injury, and then the doctor, they determine like, okay, the story that the person told does not match the mechanism of injury, or it's not consistent with that type of bruising. We have like domestic violence screening. I would sometimes be on the domestic violence healthcare team screen, and you have to go through certain questions and kind of empathize, try to pull out what you could, and we would still leave resources with the individual, even if they said no, I don't want to talk about it, or no, it's not that. Even if they were denying it, we still gave them the resources, just in case that's something that they wanted later. But that was almost always for the females. But I'm not going to get into that right now, just because, like I said, I have a video about that later on. But, the message, I don't think it sends a message that you have to document more, you need to do more. These type of crimes, we know they happen behind closed doors. It's just, the best lie is the truth. there's a saying, it's like, if you tell the truth, you don't have to remember, you just keep telling the truth. If you tell a lie, then the problem is you got to keep remembering, and then your story doesn't match up. And that's what happened with Amber Heard, is that she told too many lies, or she exaggerated to the point where it's just not believable. Like, the pictures that she showed just didn't line up with lived experience. But anyone that's had a broken nose or black eye, I've had black eyes. That those pictures, it just doesn't match up. It's like, if you're already going to document it, you document it when the shit looks horrible. You don't document a little dot that looks like, I don't even know what that was. So I think that's very disingenuous to say that the message is, oh, no, you got to document and you have to record this and you have to do that. Again, Amber just has to take her L and stop trying to involve every other woman in this. That was her case. All right. So let's just go ahead and take a look at Johnny Depp's lawyers this morning in their interview, and let's see what they have to say.
And joining us now are Johnny Depp's lawyers, Camille Vasquez and Benjamin Chu. And a quick disclosure, my husband has done consulting work for the Depp legal team, but not in connection with this interview. So with that aside, let me ask you, did you speak to your client right after the verdict? What was his reaction in the moment?
I think just an overwhelming sense of relief. I was speaking with another friend of ours, a mutual friend of Johnny's and ours, and he said, I haven't seen Johnny smile like that in 6 years.
The weight of the world is off of his shoulders. He's got his life back.
As you well know, the law does not favor a plaintiff like Johnny Depp in a defamation case like this. The burden is very high, the threshold is high, and he crossed it. Frankly speaking, were you stunned at this victory? Ben?
Well, we had ultimate confidence in Johnny and the jury and the facts of this case, and you can only hope that the jury will see it. And in this case, they did, and the verdict was overwhelmingly in his favor.
I should mention the jury did find Mr. Depp responsible for defamation for one of the statements made by his lawyer. It accused her essentially of staging a scene in furtherance of an abuse hoax. How do you square that finding with the rest of the verdict, Camille?
I think it's just the verdict is overwhelmingly positive for Johnny, and it was unanimous. There were 7 people that decided he was defamed.
Amber Heard's attorney was right here the day after the verdict, and she said the jury had not been permitted to see certain evidence that would have bolstered and verified Amber Heard's claims of abuse, in particular, therapist notes. What is your response to that? And was there evidence that was suppressed for a valid legal reason that might have made a difference?
I think that was very disappointing to hear that, and to hear her impugn the character of the jury. And the evidence came in that should come in, and the judge was very fair to both sides.
In particular, she cites the UK judgment. As we all know, Johnny Depp sued The Sun, a newspaper in the United Kingdom. He lost that case, the judge finding that claims by the newspaper that he was a wife beater were substantially true. Now, Amber Heard's lawyers say that judgment should have come into this court case. What say you?
It was a different process, right? And also, Mr. Depp and Ms. Heard in this case were the parties. They had different disclosure obligations. So we disagree. The overwhelming evidence that was presented in this case in Virginia far exceeded what was presented in the UK, and we believe the jury got it right.
As you know, this trial was very closely watched. Social media certainly took off in a way that we've seen high-profile trials before, but this is the social media age. Do you believe the jurors saw any of that, were swayed by any of that?
No, I don't think there's any reason to believe that the jurors violated their oath. And again, that suggestion was disappointing to hear.
Yeah, I mean, Amber Heard's a lawyer.
So far, they're cool, calm, and collected, as we've seen throughout the entire trial. I think their answers are very succinct, straight to the point. It's their response to Elaine. I agree. I think it's really disappointing that you kind of throw the legal system under the bus because you didn't win your case, or you didn't get the verdict that you thought that you should have received. And then, well, we'll just go ahead and continue to see what else they have to say.
Said so. She said it would have been unavoidable because it's on TikTok, it's on social media. I mean, in the old days, you'd tell the jury before they went out, don't read newspapers, don't watch the evening news. Now it's everywhere.
It is everywhere, but at the same time, they were admonished every single night. And they had a tremendous amount of respect, I think, for the court and the process, and they were doing the best that they could.
Yeah. Support for Johnny Depp online was exponentially greater than for Amber Heard. Just one example on TikTok, the Justice for Amber Heard hashtag has 27 million views. Justice for Johnny Depp, 20 billion. Heard's attorneys have suggested that perhaps this is because of an orchestrated campaign on behalf of Johnny Depp. Do you know anything about an online campaign on behalf of Johnny Depp?
That is utterly baseless. In fact, very early in the case, the prior Chief Judge White had thrown out a count in the counterclaims that related to that. It was absolutely absurd and baseless.
And you know for a fact that neither he nor his agents nor anyone tried to in some way pay for or otherwise encourage this kind of social media activity.
False. Categorically false.
Why do you think the jury didn't believe her? Because when you look at the verdict, it really comes down to that. The issue was, is what she's saying true or false? And by their verdict, they said it's false.
I want to speak quickly to the smear campaign because Amber Heard and her BFF Eve Barlow keep insisting that there's a smear campaign, there's a hate campaign. So I guess they're saying that Johnny Depp is paying bots or some people, PR team, to like make all these fake accounts and like spam. But it seems like it's an authentic reaction from the public based on the leak audio and the evidence. I don't know, like, if it's a smear campaign, you have to have some evidence and be able to prove it. And they weren't able to, just as Ben Chu was saying, basically the judge threw it out, wasn't allowed to go in the counterclaim. So that means they really didn't have any strong evidence that that's the case. But yet they still go on social media saying that it is. I don't think she's learned anything about defamation, and saying things that aren't true. But, here we are.
Well, my sense is that it had a lot to do with accountability, that Johnny owned his issues. He was very candid about his alcohol and drug issues. He was candid about some unfortunate texts that he wrote. And I think it was a sharp contrast to Ms. Heard, who didn't seem, or at least the jury may have perceived, that she didn't take accountability for anything.
As you know,
Agreed. Amber Heard would be a very difficult client to work with, in my opinion, as a therapist, because the goal in therapy is to get you to take your power back, to be empowered, to improve your life. And it's about, accepting the things that you can't change and letting go of that and focusing on things you can control and improving your life in that way. And she seems to be very stuck on the past, and she seems to always to be very argumentative. When there's things that obviously it's a lie, she would just double down. She would get overly defensive, again, argumentative, like, well, why would I? Why would I do this? And so it's just, it wasn't a good look for her. She could have ate some humble pie, really. And maybe that would have helped her credibility and just, owning up to things that weren't consistent. But it was just too many holes in the story that everything just pretty much fell apart. And I think the jury saw that, and the public has seen it as well.
This has been closely watched, and in the Me Too context, some people have wondered whether there is a larger resonance to this trial, whether it sends a message. Do you see any larger message beyond the case you tried?
No, I mean, frankly, we don't. We're here to talk about the case that we tried, right? We encourage all victims to come forward, have their day in court, which is exactly what happened in this case.
Do you feel confident in your appeal? Ms. Heard does intend to appeal.
We feel very confident that there are no errors that would justify any kind of successful appeal.
And there's another piece of their interview that was on Good Morning America that I just wanted to highlight. And it's in response to a statement from Amber Heard's team in response to Johnny Depp's lawyers, doing interviews, basically the same thing Elaine Bredehoft did. So we'll take a look at that.
Ms. Heard's lawyers put out a statement yesterday saying the verdict was a setback for women's rights. And they went on to say that it's unseemly and unprofessional for you all to be, quote, taking a victory lap for setting back decades of how women can be treated in the courtroom. How do you respond to that?
I think it's disappointing. We're only speaking about what happened in this case, right? And the facts in this case were overwhelmingly positive for Johnny. And the verdict speaks for itself.
How about the broader criticism, though? It's not just from Heard's teams. Victims advocates have argued that the verdict is going to have a chilling effect on domestic violence victims, and it's a blow to the Me Too movement.
I think our response to that is we encourage any victim to come forward. Domestic violence doesn't have a gender.
So you don't see this as a setback to the movement in any way, shape, or form?
We do not. We believe that the verdict speaks for itself. The facts are what they were. The jury made a unanimous decision based on those facts.
During your cross-examination, what was your impression of Ms. Heard's impression on the jury?
I think that her impression on the jury was what it was. I think something that I focused on and we focused on in that cross-examination was using her words against her. And it was very important for us to, every question that was asked was tied to something she had said previously. And I think the jury got to see and the world got to see and hear from Ms. Heard in that relationship on every single topic.
And George, I think there was a real contrast. Johnny took ownership of a lot of things, and it seemed at times, and perhaps it came through to the jury, that she had an answer for everything, and she wasn't taking accountability for anything. And I think that made a difference.
So I agree. I think it did make a difference when someone takes accountability, even for a small part. Like owning up to something that's not favorable to you does make a bigger impression as far as like your credibility, and it's a step in you healing and going in the right direction. I love Camille's answer that domestic violence does not have a gender. We can acknowledge, again, I think I said in a previous video, you can acknowledge that more victims of sexual violence and domestic violence are, female, but we cannot overlook our male victims as well. Everyone and every victim deserves to be heard and to come forth. And in the court of law, this works for any type of crime. The evidence and facts have to come out. You have to be cross-examined. And yes, it can feel intense and it can be very stressful. But the thing is, if you have your word and if you're truthful, the truth can stand to scrutiny. And I agree, the facts are what they are. So overall, it's just interesting to see, again, the stark contrast between Amber's attorneys and Johnny's attorneys. Who knows what's going to happen with this case as far as the appeal. But my hope is that everyone does kind of just move forward. It seems like Amber has something to say. Like what Ben Chu was saying, she had an answer for everything. And even now that the case is over, she still has something to say. Like she can't just, like if she wants to regain her credibility or to kind of let this blow over, she would kind of need to like fade out for a second because the public has already made their decision. But, she keeps releasing statements about Johnny's trying to move forward, but he set women's rights back by decades, and then attacking the attorneys for, doing a press circuit the same way her attorneys did. It's like she's going to have a PR statement like every week now because it's not going to make it any better for her in the public's eye, at least. But anyway, thank you guys for tuning in and watching that. Please watch out for my next video where I talk about men victims of domestic violence and just my own experience and observations working in the hospital, as well as with other domestic violence professionals. Thanks again. Make sure to subscribe if you haven't subscribed to my channel if you want to hear more from my perspective as a therapist. Thank you so much for watching. Have a good day.